All right, I see our participant numbers leveling off, so I think it's safe for us to get started. Before we begin, please be aware that we are recording this webinar. Good morning, good afternoon, folks. My name is Annie Mendoza, and I'm an election expert with the Elections Group. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, the Elections Group partners with state and local election officials to implement new programs or improve processes for voters and stakeholders. We provide guidance, resources, and direct management support for states and local jurisdictions. Our team is made up of all former election officials and election experts from across the United States. We're pleased to have you all with us today for de-escalation resources for election workers. De-escalation training for election officials can help enhance public safety and prevent conflicts from escalating into violence or disruptions. De-escalation training also helps improve conflict resolution skills, fosters public trust in the elections process, and can provide additional benefits such as stress management by equipping election workers with the tools that they need to appropriately and effectively respond to disruptions. The Elections Group has been a longtime advocate of de-escalation resources. Our customizable pocketbook and posters have helped election officials across the United States diffuse tense situations and help remind watchers, voters, and observers, and more of appropriate election decorum and behavior. As we head into November, these and other resources like these are especially important for election officials, which is why I'm excited to get this webinar started and introduce our panelists who are joining me today. So let's begin. I'm excited to announce our panelists joining me for today's discussion. We have Rudabeh Kishi and Theo Sittler with the Bridging Divides Initiative and Ross Weistroffer with Hacks Hackers. Rudabeh, I'll let you go first to give more of an introduction on your background and the work that you do.
Thanks so much, Annie. Hopefully everyone's able to see my slides. Yes, great. Thank you for having me. I'm Rudabeh Kishi. I'm Chief Research Officer at the Bridging Divides Initiative. BDI is a nonpartisan research initiative housed at Princeton, and we track and mitigate political violence in the U.S. Our work really revolves around getting the right information into the right hands at the right time so that individuals, organizations, leaders can all act together to tackle political violence. I oversee our research portfolio at BDI, focusing on delivering action-oriented research. So I'm happy to kick off the BDI segment of the program by speaking a bit to some of the work that we're doing around understanding threats and harassment against local officials. And then I'll hand it to Theo, who oversees our policy portfolio, focusing on building frameworks for effective response, and he'll speak a bit more to the de-escalation resources that we have available for election workers. So threats and harassment against local officials endanger their safety, impede their ability to discharge the duties of their office, and undermine democratic governance. And to fill this gap in reliable information on emerging trends in hostility targeting local officials, BDI has brought together a consortium of organizations and initiatives from across the ecosystem to launch a first-of-its-kind research project to systematically track this type of activity nationwide. Employing a unique mixed methods and participatory approach that incorporates a longitudinal event data set, representative surveys, and in-depth interviews, our BDI Understanding Threats and Harassment Against Local Officials project, UTH for short, provides an empirical foundation to understand and respond to the threat and harassment landscape in the U.S. So I'm happy to spend a few minutes sharing a few more details with you around each of these different components of the work, as well as what they help tell us about the current threat landscape. So the Threats and Harassment Dataset, or THD, was launched earlier this year, and it's a living dataset that's updated monthly by our team of researchers in-house. It currently includes coverage from the start of 2022 to present. We just released our latest batch of data covering July 2024 last week. The data set now has over 1,100 events targeting local elected, appointed, and/or municipal officials. So that includes, but isn't limited to, election officials, poll workers, and hired or volunteer election facilitators. The THD is an event-based data set. It draws on publicly accessible secondary information, but we have plans to integrate primary data too via our surveys and interviews, which I'll speak to in just a moment. And the data set includes a variety of types of variables, that help to capture descriptive information, substantive details, information on time and place, the nature and method of the targeting, information on the target, perpetrator, source details, etc. And so given the structure of the data, that THD is able to capture changes in rate or frequency of hostility over time, like if there are spikes in targeting around certain mobilization, as well as what similarities or differences might exist in the experiences of different types of officials. So in regards to the former, the graph you see here shows trends in the data as of July 24. So you can see that there's a notable increase in events last month. And this was driven in part by a series of high profile cases where multiple officials were targeted at once and in both online and offline spaces, as well as a localized spike in threats and harassment against local officials in Pennsylvania in the aftermath of the shooting targeting former President Trump at a campaign rally. And in addition to these cases, though, the data show that threats and harassment are becoming increasingly normalized at the hyperlocal level, so beyond national politics and election-related issues alone. Hyperlocal issues, so things like land development or zoning issues, these types of things account for the majority of events recorded last month and have been an increasingly salient driver of this type of hostility. In regards to the latter, so regarding similarities or differences across different types of local officials, you can see from the graph here, election officials and poll workers in orange tend to see disproportionately more hostility during Novembers if we compare different months of each year. Of course, that's when elections tend to be held. And this is the increased targeting relative to other types of local officials. So that might suggest that we could expect to see more hostility targeting those types of officials going into election season this year. Last November, at least 10 election offices across multiple states received mail from unknown individuals containing powder substances. Some of those were identified as fentanyl, all during ballot processing. And so the THD is the only component of our larger project that includes election officials in particular, so it can be useful in this type of analysis. So far this year, we've already recorded 8 events targeting election officials, including a death threat towards an Arizona election official and the harassment of election workers in Washington, for example, and we expect to potentially see more going into election season. The survey component of our work entails ongoing quarterly representative surveys, which we take on in partnership with Civic Pulse. And they help to really shed light on how persistent hostility might be, as well as offering some insight into the human side and the human impact of this targeting. Thus far, we've completed 8 rounds of surveys of local elected officials. So these are like mayors or local council members, and 2 rounds of surveys of school board officials as well. So data as of Q2 of this year will be published actually in the next coming weeks, but here's a sneak peek of some of our findings that you can expect. You can see hostility, so threats and harassment experienced by local elected officials have been continuing at pace at an unacceptably high baseline, but worries of experiencing hostility, as you can see from the graph here, have been on the rise. And that's really important to consider because worries can still really contribute to changes in behavior by officials. Some report changes that they have made to the policies they support, their social media habits, engagement at events, all as a result of these fears. And another key point to underline is that these trends cut across party lines. So there's no discernible difference in the prevalence of this targeting by threats and harassment when comparing Democrats to Republicans, for example. But where there is a discernible difference is in the experience of women and racial minority officials. They experience hostility at disproportionately high rates. Lastly, the qualitative component of our project includes trauma-informed, in-depth interviews with local officials who are surveyed, and they can choose to opt in to talking to us further about their experiences. And our hope is that the officials, if they are interested or amenable, we can begin to integrate any incidents that they share with us of threats and harassment that they've experienced into the threats and harassment data set that I just spoke to. And that would help complement the more secondary information there. We've completed nearly 150 interviews now. And so we're planning to publish a new report based on some of these qualitative findings in the coming months. But these conversations have helped to uncover how officials are dealing with and how they feel about the challenges in their public service with in-depth details about the targeting, what strategies they've employed to combat such challenges, etc. And so interviewed officials have shared strategies like how they have made personal changes, how they foster relationships with their elected peers to build networks, and how they build an understanding of their communities and resources available to them, amongst other things. And so the discussion today of available resources will hopefully be a really good example of that. If you're interested in BDI's UTH project more largely, you can navigate to it at the URL that I've listed here. You can access all three of the projects that I outlined. Data for the threats and harassment data set is publicly available to you via our website, as well as the survey work via our partner Civic Pulse's website. You can find our latest reports, etc. So hopefully that'll be of interest to you all. And so with that, I'll hand it over to my colleague Theo to speak about some of our de-escalation resources.
Thank you very much, Rutabaga. Bear with me as I bring up my screen as well. Hoping that y'all are able to view my screen. Thanks for that. Thank you, Rutabaga. So now that Rutabaga has really provided an overview of the type of situations that local officials are facing, I wanted to talk a little bit about our de-escalation and community safety project. So my role at BDI as a policy director is to really think about mitigation strategies. So in response to help mitigate these types of threats and the types of conflict that communities are facing all across the country. So I'll provide a kind of review what the de-escalation project is, why it's important, and the role that BDI plays in connecting folks with these resources across the country. So at the heart of our project is a state-by-state directory of trainers and practitioners who are experts in addressing conflict and de-escalating tensions and keeping people safe, particularly during those really moments of crisis and contention in their communities. And I'll talk a little bit about what the directory actually is here in a moment. But wanted to talk about why, especially for BDI, why is de-escalation important, and why have we really invested a lot into this project and building out this directory. There are really, I think of this as three key principles that drive our work on de-escalation and community safety. Number one, it's to keep people safe at the heart of it. Is that in an increased risk environment, having access to practical tools to stay safe is vitally important, as many of you would know on this call. And then also recognizing that law enforcement may not always be the appropriate response, given the type of threats or harassment that people might be facing. And then secondly, de-escalation resources are important because it helps to undermine disruptive anti-democratic behavior that seeks to divide us with effective methods and strategies that is appropriate for that particular context. We can prevent bad actors from achieving their goals and gaining a foothold. And then thirdly, is to protect civic space so that communities have a place to continue resolving their differences via the political and democratic processes. So what is BDI's role in this project? So as I mentioned before, at the heart of our project is the de-escalation directory. It's not just a list of organizations that we've pulled together. A core part of this project are the relationships that we've been able to build over the last 2+ years with trainers all across the country. And then there are at least three ways in which we actively engage. I mean, we know the organizations and trainers that are in the directory. Part of our kind of method in putting the list together is that we have connected individually with each of the organizations to understand the type of trainings that they provide, the constituencies that they work with, and the local communities that they serve. And because of that, we often find ourselves playing an active matchmaking role in ensuring that the right trainer is matched with the right context. And so we're often facilitating and introducing those connections. And then lastly, flowing out of our relationships and understanding these community needs through our matchmaking work, we are working to kind of strengthen the broader network of trainers and to build a field of de-escalation and community safety. Because we know that these skills are vital during election periods, but it's not just during elections. These are just good skills to have in any situation. So the organizations that are in the de-escalation directory generally tend to fall across kind of three broad categories. Number one, they're organizations that provide nonviolence education, direct action, and community safety type of trainings and support. So for example, de-escalation and safety in protest settings. Some are focused on more general education, while others are providing trainings around effective nonviolent strategies. Generally, groups that fall in this category try to think of community safety needs separate from law enforcement. And then secondly, a good number of organizations in the directory are community mediation centers. Now, these are the types of organizations that are more traditional conflict resolution and mediation practitioners that work to resolve anything from workplace conflict to providing alternative dispute resolution services within the court systems. And for them, oftentimes de-escalation is just one tool in their toolbox. And within the kind of the broad field of conflict resolution practice. And many of these organizations also tend to be members of the National Association for Community Mediation, which is an association that has about 300 membership across the United States, 300 organizations and practitioners. And then finally, there are also the for-profit consulting organizations, which are able to provide trainings at scale. Oftentimes, these are organizations that are working with healthcare providers and others. So accessing the directory, it's on our website. It's quite literally a map of organizations that are in communities across the U.S. We have over 120 organizations and individual trainers that are in the directory. Just as of 2 weeks ago, we are now covering all 50 states across the country. Now, some of these organizations will work just in their local communities, while others, while they're based in a local community, might be providing trainings on a national scale as well. And then in addition to that, we also have state-by-state PDFs that you can download and use in your work as well. And then finally, there are also kind of quick reference guides, resources that are specifically designed for your role. This particular resource is designed for poll workers. We think of these as just kind of rules of thumb, quick reference guides, one-pagers that folks can download and use. But I do want to highlight that this is not a substitute for deeper engagement and deeper training. We always recommend that if you want to engage in this and get trained and get these skills, that you seek out trainings with a trainer. So that's our de-escalation and community safety project. As you know, as Rudabeh mentioned up top, BDI's work spans across multiple areas and objectives. These are just some examples of some of the resources that we provide. So our national and state-based situation reports, where we send out reports on a regular basis to close partners, tracking early warning signals and political violence incidents in communities, customized briefs and analysis for those who request, and then of course the Understanding Threats project that Rudabeh already presented on. Happy to connect with folks, happy to engage more during the Q&A. session, as I said earlier, we are available to connect folks with trainings on an as needed basis. So yeah, thank you, Annie, for having us, and back over to you.
Thank you so much, Rudabeh and Theo. Now, Ross, I'll hand it over to you to introduce yourself and your organization, and then you can get right into your slides.
Absolutely. Hi there, everyone. I'm Ross Weisstroffer. I'm a researcher with grassroots media organization Hacks Hackers, working on the Analysis and Response Toolkit for Trust, or ART project, where we've been partnering with the North Carolina State Board of Elections to create ART Leo, our training on de-escalatory dialogue and connective communication for local election officials. Now, as everyone on this call knows, local election officials are facing a sometimes challenging workplace communication environment while dealing with a loss of institutional memory due to turnover. And our project is focused on helping the LEOs on those front lines of engaging with the public while also having to deal with conflict and distrust. So through the Art Leo curriculum that we developed, we offer tips, templates, and examples on how to connect and de-escalate with voters, covering our different strategies for communicating about contentious topics, with methods and examples of how to de-escalate a conversation so you can keep voters informed no matter the circumstance. Now, where does all that content and the art project come from? So with the support of the National Science Foundation, our project's research initially started out focusing on de-escalation and then communication issues that were being faced by communicators in public health. But we've obviously come to realize those issues are not only part of a larger problem faced by many kinds of public communicators, but they're absolutely the problems that LEOs are facing as well. So to address that broader issue, our project is offering software and curriculum that shares evidence-based insights from research fields such as psychology, social science, and conflict resolution on what they have to say about how to communicate under those difficult circumstances. So we've distilled all of that very academic research into a more easy to communicate model of different ways to communicate and different tips on how to communicate for trust building around accurate, credible information. And we've then taken this very lovely model and actually turned it into a training curriculum taught through Art Leo as an online course. So in its current format, Art Leo is just 6 modules of 10 to 20 minutes each for a total of no more than an hour. This online course aims especially to help get new LEOs, pressing officials, temporary election workers, and anyone who's interested in learning what the latest research has to say about how to tackle these public communication and de-escalation challenges. And each of these strategies you saw as part of our communication model, we've then broken down and covered just step by step through each of those 6 modules, from our understand strategy on how to signal listening and empathy for voters' concerns to informing and connecting, which focus on our methods for de-escalating a conversation so you can collaborate despite conflict. And with that said, if any of that content sounds interesting and you are an election officials who would like to test drive our course, see how our content might help you, your office, or your election workers, or who might want to offer feedback and your insights on what's happening in your county or state, I'd like to encourage you to please be in touch at arttart@hackshackers.com. We are open and interested in listening to hearing people's thoughts and experiences with our course. But with that, that's all I have to say, and I'm happy to expand more on our approach and how we're thinking through communication and de-escalation in the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Ross, and let's get right into that Q&A portion of our panel. So this first question is open to anyone. So let's talk about the basic principles of de-escalation. What is de-escalation and why is it important to election officials?
I can go ahead and start right off since I said I was going straight into the Q&A. What I think is interesting as we study the topic of de-escalation is that it's not necessarily just a way to make someone act less angry, although that's obviously important, but it's ultimately a way to figure out how to address conflict when it inevitably comes up so you can collaborate with the other person towards a common goal. And for election officials, that goal is to make sure the public is well informed, regardless of maybe how much or how little the other person might trust you or the election system. And so, as long as it's important for election officials to be able to communicate with all members of the public, de-escalation will be important as well.
Yeah, Annie, and maybe that's excellent. I agree with everything that Ross said. I mean, for us, one of the key reasons where we've been engaged in this issue is because we know that particularly for election officials and poll workers on election day, kind of their primary goal is to ensure the smooth administration of elections on that day, and that when people are prepared with these basic conflict resolution, de-escalation skills, they are able to focus on the smooth administration of elections. If there are kind of disruptive behavior, folks who show up in those settings. And so being prepared and having these skills in your back pocket, at least from the conversations that we've had, seems to be really helpful in making sure that elections get administered. And then beyond elections, these are just good skills to have in any community when you're facing conflict and contention. So I think that for us, that's at least as an added focus, that's been kind of the reason why we think de-escalation is important.
Great. Going back to you, Ross, your team at Hacks Hackers, like you said, you've worked directly with the North Carolina State Board of Elections for the Art Leo project. You did talk about the initiative, but what were the realized gains or benefits from the exercise?
Thank you, Annie. NCSBE has been a really fantastic partner when we first started piloting Art Leo. And so briefly over the last 4 months, we worked with a cohort of their hubs teams, which are made up of LEOs from all 100 counties of their state to provide us feedback as we rolled out each part of the course for the very first time. And we really needed their feedback and input. But for me, the gains and benefits that I most appreciated was just getting able to interact with some really engaged audiences in North Carolina who are able to share really directly the very real challenges they're facing day to day and just hear more about just how much this knowledge is really needed right now. And we are excited, and NCSB is excited to continue rolling out the course now across North Carolina and continuing to improve it based on what we hear. It's just the rough draft is always a work in progress, as it turns out. So, and I also want to briefly make sure that we mention that we are also working with the Coalition of Bay Area Officials to also partner, get their feedback, and hear more about what these resources can do in local communities.
That's great to hear. Thank you. This question is more geared towards BDI, so Theo and Rudabeh. BDI has several regional and national offerings for election officials that cover de-escalation, bystander, and community safety training. Can you talk more about this initiative and what success you have seen?
Sure, Annie. Happy to jump in. I mean, as I said, at the heart of our project is the directory and a map of organizations trainers, practitioners that exist across the U.S. And so our goal in really creating this map is to make these trainings accessible to communities, to officials, et cetera, and accessible both in terms of just knowing that these resources exist in these communities, but also understanding the right trainer for that right context. And so I think that's where we often tend to play a facilitation matchmaking role in helping folks get connected with those trainings. And I think that over the long term, I mean, some of these communities have had conflict resolution skills and practices in them for many years. and often people don't know that they exist, right? And so I think, and our hope is that over the long term, that these practices and these skills will get more socialized in these communities, contributing to longer term kind of conflict resolution skills that people can utilize, and really trying to then prevent broader disruptions from taking place. And so if there are, I know there's some questions in the chat about getting connected with trainers. Happy to engage with those as well. But feel free to get in touch with BDI at bdi@princeton.edu if you are in need of direct training resources and in need of getting connected with trainers. Happy to kind of work with you to figure out what that could look like. So yeah, happy to send it back over to you, Annie.
Rudabeh, not to put you on the spot, but just wanted to give you the opportunity to add some more thoughts if you would like.
Thanks so much, Annie. These are great questions, and they seem to be really excited about the great de-escalation resources that both BDI and the ART project are able to offer. So I think Theo's covered it all from our side, but if anyone has any questions about trend or dynamics, I'm happy to speak to those, but I'm also happy to defer to my colleagues.
Thank you. So this question is open to anyone. We've seen increased tension surrounding elections in recent years. In addition to that, and what we've previously discussed, what are some additional benefits of incorporating de-escalation training and resources?
I'll go ahead and start. I know when I first started to really focus around our de-escalation research, I started to realize that when we're learning about de-escalation, we're also thinking through really how to approach conflict. And we're also really thinking about how we communicate. So how we seek to understand people, how we can show them like their concerns really matter to us, how we can connect with people to address the underlying issues and values that are important to them around elections. And that's about really how we can see people who seem unreachable and create an environment where we can still reach them where they're at in a way where we can also make sure that we're respected and that we're in a safe workplace environment. And for election officials, that offers an opportunity, I think, to not just reach more people, but to make sure that even under difficult circumstances, I know I see a question in the Q&A chat about voter suppression, under difficult circumstances such as those, you can still, at the very least, keep the lines of communication open and make sure that people know that no matter what, you're still someone they can count on for trustworthy information, even if they disagree with you, even if they are worried or scared about what they feel is the state of elections, that they can still count on you.
Annie, I don't have anything to add to Ross's fantastic answer.
Sounds great. Rudabeh, how about for you? Okay, perfect. Again, this question is for everyone as well. What should election officials look for in a good de-escalation training program?
I can start, but since Ross is here, and they have developed what looks like a fantastic de-escalation training program, might be able to really add to. I think one of the kind of the key feedback that we've received, especially with the elections community, is that in addition to all of the other trainings that officials receive, trying to condense down this material into bite-sized pieces so that it's available and it's usable to them on election day. Recognizing that that officials often are getting lots of different trainings in election administration and procedures, making sure that this information is distilled in a way that they can access it, in a way that they can actually utilize it when they're faced with in those kind of crisis moments. Yeah, I think any good de-escalation training, at least from what we've seen, we recognize that there are lots of different approaches that people might take. But at the heart of it is calming and centering yourself, being a good listener and trying to redirect grievances in order for procedures and administration to move forward in a smooth way. But I'm sure Rock would have much more layered to that very kind of basic understanding.
Well, I will say, Theo, you stole the word bite-sized right out of our mouth. So I know, as I mentioned, our modules are no more than 10 to 15 minutes precisely because we heard so much feedback about just how busy people in elections are, and a good program should definitely meet you, local election officials, where you're at with that as well. And I know that your course content can speak to that as well over at BDI. The other two things I think election officials should look for are a diversity of approaches and scenarios. It's the reality that no situation that requires de-escalation is ever really quite the same. So you want to make sure you're fully equipped with all the different tools. And there's that other word you mentioned, Theo, toolbox, for whatever life throws at you. And I think the other thing to look for are programs that encourage practice. I know in our course, we try to incorporate different exercises. We try to encourage participants to practice saying our examples out loud, just so that way they can think through really when and how our tips can be best used, but also because in the heat of the moment, I don't want someone trying to reach in their back pocket for a tool and not feel like they aren't fully prepared to use it for the situation that they're facing.
Thank you all. Well, speaking of training, I wanted to share our training that we created between the elections group and BDI before we get into our open Q&A. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So bear with me here 1 second. All right. Can everyone see that? Wonderful. Thank you. So the Elections Group and the Bridging Divides Initiative at Princeton University partnered to create de-escalation training resources for election workers. Among the resources included is a 30-minute self-paced course accessible through the Elections Group's new Election Learning Lab. Officials can sign up election workers and other team members for the virtual training, and the training can be done at your own pace. Another resource is the template of training slides for in-person election worker de-escalation training, from which offices can use all or part of the content for their training sessions. And I have the slides up right here. The content in the slides and the self-paced training are nearly identical so that your election workers can learn using the methods that work best for them. The template for the slide deck can be downloaded in either Google Slides or PDF format. So the training introduces the concept of de-escalation and looks at the key principles of the concept and techniques for handling tough situations. We take a look at the role election workers play in handling de-escalation using CISA's RADAR acronym, so recognize, assess, de-escalate, and report. We look at the CLARA method for de-escalation, which reviews the techniques of center, listen, affirm or acknowledge, respond, and assess. The course also touches on self-care and support for during and after those tough situations, and the training ends with a customizable scenario-based role play or practice session to help your election workers practice and understand the concepts. So by prioritizing de-escalation principles, election officials can help foster an environment for election workers where everyone feels heard and respected, allowing for more safe and productive interactions. Again, the links to these resources are provided in the chat, so you can get started today. All right. So I did see that we have a number of questions in the chat. Feel free to keep sending those in. So our first question from Teresa, will you please recommend any train-the-trainer organizations? Training resources are tight due to high demand and has been difficult to get training in my area. I have skills as a facilitator and would like to train in my area through our clerk offices.
I was actually just in the process of writing a response to Teresa's really great question. There are a number of organizations that would provide training, train-the-trainer trainings. Happy to kind of our methodology for trying to make those matchings is really in connecting with the individual or in connecting with a particular group or community, understanding what their needs are, that can and then finding in our directory the right match to those needs. We are currently working with an organization that is providing train the trainer for grassroots activists networks that are working at the very much community grassroots levels. So happy to connect with that resource too. Therese, feel free to send us an email at BDI, and happy to connect with you and help make those connections as needed. But over to you, Ross, if you had any other recommendations on that particular question.
None from me. Thank you for covering that so thoroughly.
Yes, thank you. Next question is from Thomas. Are you training local election officials on de-escalation strategies to reduce tension in communities where voter suppression is alleged?
To respond to that, I think voter suppression and also many other hot button issues that are coming up came up in our feedback from LEOs around, for instance, inaccurate vote counts, mail-in balloting, voting machines. We're doing our best to make sure that our content and our examples very directly address as many of those hot button issues as possible. And going forward, we're also hoping to begin to collate resources about different topics in particular, so that way LEOs can then immediately pull from that information as they try to address the topics that are coming up, and voter suppression is definitely one of them. So.
Fiora Rudabeh, would you like to add anything? Okay.
No, yep.
All right, the next question from Betsy. I'm a judge of elections in Pennsylvania, so that's the head poll worker at her polling place. I've been in touch with a CIPS representative. How is your effort dovetailing with the work they are doing?
I'm not sure what CIPS stands for. It's possible that, oh, and I do see a comment from Betsy down below that she meant CIPA, this cybersecurity, cyber and infrastructure security administration. We don't work directly with CISA on these trainings as BDI, but we know that CISA does have de-escalation and some safety resources, and we point to those when appropriate. And Annie, I know that the training module that we developed together includes some resources from CISA as well. So yeah, but we're not in direct collaboration or contact with CISA.
And briefly, in addition to CISA, I want to give a shout out to the EAC, Election Assistance Commission, because they've recently created a great series of Communication 101 videos about developing key messaging that are a great introduction to communicating with the public, in addition to how to de-escalate with the public. I'll drop a link.
Thank you. The next question is, we're working on preparing de-escalation training for our poll workers in a local election office. What kinds of trends should we be aware of and make sure our poll workers are ready to address?
I can do that one. It's about trends. So thanks so much for that question. I would say that in the data we're seeing is that it's not that there are very specific issues that are driving, the risk, if you will, to different local officials, including election officials. We're seeing some dynamics around like national politics and hot button issues like we've been talking about at play, but also so much of the story, and I touched on this a bit, is that hyperlocal dynamics are really driving a lot of this engagement. And I know a lot of you, some of the questions that are coming up are around, the differences given like unique location contexts and things. And I think that plays such a huge role in it. I think it was maybe Ross that mentioned, the importance of how no two risks are necessarily going to like manifest in the same way. So being sure to have officials who feel capable of responding to different ways that those might manifest, I think will be really important. I think something we're seeing in some of our research and the data is, around just the variation we see. We see threats and harassment coming like in person versus remotely. Even when they're coming kind of, not in person, we're seeing online threats over phone, as well as, like mail-in, kind of like we saw last November towards some election officials. And so just being really ready, I think, for the variety, I think, is important. And I think that you all are probably best suited to know what the hyper local dynamics that are most kind of at play within your specific area, and that's probably most likely to be fueling people.
And I think we mentioned just a couple of the issues we were monitoring, but I absolutely back up everything Rutabe said. It is so incredibly hyper local. Great term for it.
Thank you. So is de-escalation training taught differently in a rural community versus in urban communities?
I can at least try to take that one. Many of the trainers that I've worked with often would, especially when we match them with a community or an organization that's looking for the training, will often want to really understand what those local needs are, whether it's urban or rural settings, and really try to shape their trainings to that context. Oftentimes trainings include role play scenarios, et cetera. And those scenarios are often really shaped for whether it's a rural or an urban context. So most trainers that I know will really try to shape their trainings for those particular contexts, which I imagine would be different between urban and rural settings for sure.
And just to expand on that a little bit, as part of our research for ArtLeo, we did interview some LEOs in rural communities, and they mentioned it's sometimes easier, very different for them to de-escalate when they almost always know 100% of the time the person they're talking to on the other side of the line and went to elementary school with them, and the context is completely different when it comes to these different contexts. And we really want to enable LEOs to address the problems in their community where they're at.
Thank you. Does the training include how to evaluate the person you're speaking with, whether it's just an upset person or a potentially worse situation?
Ross, I'm wondering if you might be suited to take that one, given the training that y'all have developed.
Let's see. The focus of our training in particular does cover how to basically assess the situation in terms of whether and ensure that you, as covered in your training, I believe, Theo, and Rutabe, being able to assess the situation on your own terms and be able to understand and separate the situation into a situation where you do need external help, you need to fall back on emergency protocol, versus a situation that is within your wheelhouse that you can de-escalate. Every situation being created different. That evaluation process is important, and we do cover that, especially in our first module, which is all about how to consider the context, how to evaluate the situation, and how to evaluate your own needs in the communication.
Thank you. I'll actually add a little bit to that as well. And Ross, I'll kind of build upon what you said, that it's poll workers and election workers have to remember that they're just one part of a larger process, and they're not expected to handle everything, every situation that happens on election day. There's a team at their polling place for a reason. There's an election office helping that polling place as well for a reason. So if you do get into a situation that you don't feel like you can handle fully, absolutely tag out with a teammate, call your local elections office. It doesn't all fall on you as a poll worker to handle the situation in its entirety. Okay. So looks like we have one more question. When we first started our de-escalation and security training a few years ago for our election officers, The majority of incidents we encountered at our vote centers involved either voters or observers intentionally causing disruptions. However, for the last couple elections, the majority of incidents we encountered involved members of the public who are not at our vote centers to vote. So, for example, folks on substances or people with mental illness who are having a crisis in the vicinity of one of our vote centers. I feel like most de-escalation resources I have found online, hold on, I just lost my spot, for election officers revolve around voters and observers, but not other people. Are there best practices or resources you would recommend for election officers on engaging or de-escalating situations that go beyond election-specific ones?
Certainly, I mean, there are, one of the things that we've found, especially in talking with trainers, is that the de-escalation and methods or bystander intervention trainings are applicable across different contexts. And the kind of the foundational skills that are needed are the same, and the way in which they might get applied in different contexts might differ. So again, going back to my earlier answer, right? I mean, trainers often will want to really tailor their trainings for the context that folks might be facing. And so there are de-escalation resources that are specific to those different contexts. Happy to, again, connect folks on an as needed basis. I'll also note that on our website, we can also drop the link to the de-escalation page again. I had, in my slide deck, I had included the de-escalation one-pager specific to poll workers. We also have a number of other one-pagers that are focused on de-escalation techniques for local elected officials who are planning public meetings, community members and volunteers who might be involved in such public meetings or gatherings as bystanders, and then de-escalation resources in terms of engaging with law enforcement present as well. So we do have a few other resources that are tailored for different situations. Again, happy to kind of connect folks to a specific trainer and trying to match the trainer with the context that you might be facing.
Thank you. Kind of leads into my next question. Will there be a one-pager that we can provide to LEOs with these different resources? In California, we're developing some new de-escalation trainings, but a supplemental resource sheet might be helpful to include for additional training.
Happy to again connect to see if a resource like that is something that might be worth producing. The elections group might want to think about what a one-pager like that could look like. I mean, I think that's a great idea. Happy to kind of collaborate to figure out what such a resource could look like and what that should include.
Absolutely. That could be something really easy that we could put together. Possibly depending on the jurisdiction, we could even maybe customize it for your state or something like that. So definitely reach out to either us at the elections group or Bridging Divides, and we can definitely get that going. Another question with regard to the elections group self-paced training, is it possible for us to get an extension past September 15th for individuals to sign up? We may still be recruiting election day only staffers through mid-October, and I want to be able to offer it as a resource for them to sign up beyond that. Yes, we will be having another group of signups to the course, so don't panic if you don't get into this first round on September 15th. And I'm just checking to see if there are any other questions. Just some questions about dropping links to the training modules for the self-paced course. So we will be sure to do that. And if there are no other questions, I'm happy to give people a couple minutes back to their day. Any final thoughts from any of you?
just thank
Well,
you so much
thank
to the
you.
election group for having us.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
absolutely.
This has been-
Absolutely. Thank you, Annie. Yep.
Absolutely. So the resources provided today are intended as introductory materials and should not be considered a substitute for comprehensive follow-up training opportunities. We certainly encourage all participants to seek out hands-on training and further education to fully understand and implement the concepts discussed. For help connecting with additional de-escalation training opportunities, again, reach out to BDI at bdi@princeton.edu. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and thank you to our panelists for a great discussion. The resources mentioned in today's discussion have been placed into the chat, but as always, our inbox is open if you have any additional questions. Please email us at support@electionsgroup.com. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.